Welcome to the show. This is Writer's Block with Miriam Kilmurry. On Writer's Block, today's guest is Rani Rao Innes. Rani's debut novel is Kaleidoscopes, published by AuthorHouse 2015 and available from Barnes & Noble and Amazon.com. Ladies and gentlemen, you are very welcome to Writer's Block with Miriam Kilmurry, and I'm absolutely delighted to have a great friend of mine with us today. She's a very talented lady, all the way from India. Rani Rao Innes, you're very welcome to the show.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here, Miriam.
Hi, Rani. Now, I tell you, we know each other from our time living in England. But you've moved over to India recently. Is that where you're based full-time?
Yes, well, my permanent home, so to speak, is in England. But we came here nearly a year ago for Tony's treatment. And we were supposed to go back a couple of months ago, and then this lockdown happened. And so we've kind of, this has become our home for now, at least for this year, I think.
Absolutely, absolutely. Do you have any other family members who've managed to stay with you, or are they off in different parts of the world?
My daughter is in Vienna. She was in Germany, but now she's in Vienna. Alex, my son, is in France. So both my children are in Europe. But I've got a brother here. I've got a sister in Mumbai. So I do have extended family in India.
And you see, that's so important in your story, and in particular in what we're going to talk about right now, which is your book, Kaleidoscopes. And Kaleidoscopes is an extraordinary story in that I think you've brought together the experience of someone who is really looking to find herself and also re-examine acceptance. She used to accept the ways of her family and the ways of society and the expectations that were put upon her. And then she kind of had to accept change in her own life, didn't she?
That's right. Yeah.
The character of...
Yes. I started the story in Mysore because that is where I grew up. And so it's a city well known to me. And it's a small town. So she was a small town girl. And then, of course, she moves to Mumbai because of a marriage. And then when that doesn't work out, she goes to visit her younger brother, Raj, in London. And probably I use these places because this is where, these are the places I'm familiar with, and I've lived there. And so for me also, going from Mysore to London, it was a huge leap. Not that it's autobiographical in any sense at all,
no.
But I guess one writes from experience, from what
Absolutely.
You know. And I know what it feels like to be brought up in a middle-class family with a rather patriarchal dad, and to make a shift to London, which is, what Jaya does.
What she does. Well, just for the benefit of our listeners and viewers, I'm just going to give a little bit of a background to yourself, if I may. So, I mean, we are here today on Writer's Block, everybody, with Rani Innes. She's a graduate of Mysore University and Exeter University. She's a corporate trainer, she's a teacher trainer, and she is an author. She's lived between India, England, and she's founded her own business called Link Communicate, which is based in Malaysia, the UK, and India. She counts her book Kaleidoscopes as one of her latest achievements. And amongst other things, she somehow found time to be a wife to Tony and a mother to Alex and to Miriam. So I'm absolutely delighted to have you on board today on the show. And Kaleidoscopes, when exactly was it published, Rani?
Oh, this was published about 4 years ago, I think. Or was it 5? I can't remember now. I used to scribble a lot, particularly in my area, in my field. I must have done hundreds of blogs, but that's about either NLP or corporate training or teacher training. And then I used to write short stories. I really didn't count myself as a writer because it was all about my field, my area that I was writing. But then every time I felt the need to say something, I would write a short story. And these have been published in Chicken Soup for the Soul, and in it's called Unboxed Writers, and a few other places. And these were just little stories I scribbled. And every time I felt that, there was something that prompted a thought in me, and I'd have this need to put it in. I never thought of myself as a writer because, as you know, my life has been either training, teaching, or theatre. I've been in theatre for nearly 40 years now.
Yes, that's
so it
right.
was more directing plays. Yeah. So theatre has been my really my the other hat I wear as a director. So, but then this is what Kate was saying. I heard her say this, and of course, for me, it's in a very, very, very small way in comparison. Yeah, but it's theatre and writing. In both, we are finding expression for words, and in one we are speaking it, and in another we are writing it. So there's probably a relationship there. So it was theatre for me all the time. But then every time I felt the urge to say something, I'd just write a short story. And people would ask me, when are you going to write a novel?
Kilmurry.
And I said, no, there's no comparison really. But yeah, I completely agreed that both writers and theatre people, they are people who find expression for words.
Yes.
So on stage, you're expressing it, visually and vocally, verbally, and you're doing it on paper when you write. So, like I did with plays, every time I felt the urge to direct something, I'd find a play that I felt I have to put out. And I had got this list of plays that I've got to get out of my system, and I had to do it. And in a similar way, I used to sometimes find this thought, and I had to, again, put it down on paper. And I used to write short stories, and I've written about 30 odd short stories, I think. And people would say, when will you write your novel? And I would say, no, I don't have a book in me. I couldn't write a full-length book. It's just little things I scribble. And then I went to Canada to visit my cousin, and they are, beautiful, beautiful people, and they've got this most beautiful, they've got such good taste, I tell you. Beautiful house, and we had a lovely holiday where they treated me right royally. And I think one time we were driving, I think it was in Montreal, I think, and we were driving, it was autumn, it was beautiful, the leaves changing everywhere, and I thought maybe it had something to do with the way I was feeling as well, and particularly where I was, Montreal, it's so beautiful. And as I said, sometimes the external environment does have effect on the way you're feeling. Maybe I was feeling particularly sensitive then to what was happening around me, including what my cousin was saying. And as we were driving, he said something, and that just a little, he said, "What if?" It was just a what if scenario. And I told him, I said, you know what, we could make a beautiful film, we could make a movie out of this. And I said, actually, it'll make a good book. I said, why don't you write a book? And he said, I wouldn't know where to begin. It's just a thought I had. And we left it at that. But that, I think, was working in my mind. And when I came back to England, I kept thinking about it. And then I thought, I as I said, if I feel very strongly, I need to express it. And I thought, let me start writing. And I thought it'll be another short story. And before you know it, it took me about a few months, and the result was Kaleidoscopes.
Well, and the themes going through it, there's such a plethora of themes moving through the book. Yeah. And so many different, as you say, kaleidoscope colors and twists and turns, and the sense of the heroine in the story. And really, it's not just a heroine. You've got her brother, and one of the things that really impressed me about the story was the way you were able to make a very unexpected and surprising switch to a male voice at the end, in the last quarter of the book in particular. And that's a very difficult thing for a writer to do, and you did that really successfully. successfully. You got into the voice of a man.
Yeah. You know, Miriam, it's interesting you say that, because actually, as you know, the book is in 3 parts. There's
Yes.
about 3 characters, 3 voices. The first is Lakshmi, and I had very little difficulty getting under her skin and feeling like she would feel. And I would literally, you know, at night, I could visualize what was happening next and what was happening next, so much so that I would get up in the middle of the night and start scribbling and scribbling. And so one night to another, it went on, and I could see where this was going. Not initially. Tony would keep asking, so what will happen next? I would say, I don't know, you know. She'll tell you. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen next. I only know, you know, the germ of the story, but I don't know what's going to happen next. And, you know, when I used to go to bed, I used to see what's happening to Lakshmi, and I'd start scribbling. And that's how the first part happened. And I could get, as I said, under her skin. And then the second was Raj. And again, maybe because my cousin and I had talked so much the time we were there. And then when I was working in the British Council, you know, 2-3 times when I went on assignments, one of my fellow teachers, he was also gay, and he's a very dear friend, and I would pick his brains. I would say, well, tell me something that's happened to you, tell me. And he would just talk freely to me, very openly. And talking to these 2 people and a few others, I kind of, you know, started understanding you know, what they go through, how they feel, how things are for them. Because for me, it was a very different world, the way I was brought up, like Lakshmi, rather closeted and almost a cocoon of a middle class. And so when I started talking about Raj, the first person came very easily. So it was first person for Lakshmi, it was first person for Raj, and these came organically.
Yes.
And then the third part, when it was Justin, when I had to write about the Englishman, you know, it was only after I had written about 10-15 pages, I realized I'm using the third person.
Ah, yes.
Yeah. And then I realized, okay, you know, this is interesting. Then I had to go back, and then again, anyway. So it took me a little bit of time to
and you would have been,
I guess, and
you would have been very sensitive to the use of voices as a director from theatre and writing short stories. That would be something that, you know what that means when you write in different voices. The voice of the character has to really be in your head, and you want it to be in the head of your reader.
Yeah. I mean, obviously you haven't experienced what they have experienced, but you need to know what it feels like to a certain extent. And so again, the empathy comes in there to assume that, again, it's like theatre. You know, you might not have lived their life, but you have to get into that character and be able to live their life and feel like them. So there's a lot of, you know, empathy and understanding that's required. And so when I read the comments from the readers, and I read what they said, I didn't, honestly, Miriam, I didn't write this for an audience. They say that an artist is, you know, you need an audience, a painter needs a viewer, musician needs a listener, etc., etc. And that's why, and theatre, of course, without an audience, where are you? You need the audience to complete the act of, you know, the play itself. But I didn't even think of readership. I didn't think of publishing. And that reminds me, I've got a very, very dear friend called Shashi Deshpande. She's one of the preeminent writers in English in India. She's a very dear friend. And she had told me, she said, Rani, if you're considering of publishing your book, she said, don't write. She said, you have to be prepared for 30 rejections at least. And if you're not prepared for that, she said, don't write. So I didn't even think of publishing. I didn't think of readers. I just needed to get this out of my system. And I wrote and wrote and wrote. And people usually say that it takes a year to write a book. And I wrote it in 2 months. It just flowed. And it was like nonstop. I couldn't sleep. I had to get up in the middle of the night and just wrote and wrote. It took me two and a half months. But then, of course, the rewriting and the editing.
The rewriting and the editing, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You know, and I think I shrunk 1/3 at least by the time I had finished. So that it took a year in that sense. But the writing itself, I just wrote because I felt the need to say something.
And would you say that writing the first third in Lakshmi's voice, do you feel that was the easiest part?
I guess. Yes, I guess. Yeah. Because there's so many things I could relate to personally.
Yes.
Or people I knew. I've taken, for example, her life in Mumbai, her marriage.
Yes.
I think that a dear friend of mine who lives in Mysore now, as it happens, her daughter has gone through something very similar. So I had that as reference point. So, it was either me or people I knew, my mother, for instance, whose name I have taken for Lakshmi. It's my mother's name. So I had so many reference points and I could relate in so many ways. Raj, to a large extent, I could as well. And that is why maybe Justin was in third person in the beginning. But yes, it's only after I finished the book, then I felt I would like someone to read this. I'd like people to read this. I'd like to hear,
I'd just like to, if I may, I'd just like to pick up on a couple of little passages from the book, if that's okay. I mean, there's one point very early on in the book, which I know really caught my attention. And it was when her father turned around to her and she was basically talking about her life being her life. And he said, "It's your life and your business, is it? Don't you know that our children are our business, that your life is our life, that it is our duty to find you a good home and see you well settled? One day when you have children, you will understand this." You can just hear and see the father's face. You can hear the voice and see the father's face, and you immediately sense what she's come from.
Yeah.
It really resonates.
And how many Indian dads have said that to their children? Yeah, so many. But funnily enough, part of that is me. Because I remember watching some soap opera in the UK with my children, and in that I don't remember which one of the series, and the daughter tells the parents, "It's none of your business." And I looked at my children and I said, "We would never say that in India. We were two parents. We would never say, a child would never say it's not your business, because our children are our business."
Yeah.
So to that extent, that's a belief that I have as well, that our children are our business and we are their business, because what else is family? But of course, it stops short of, telling them how to live their lives and to select their mates for them. That, again, we're gone into a different territory there. But then a lot of parents, mothers and fathers, particularly fathers, do feel that. Even today.
And of course that, you and I both came out of an international teaching experience. And sometimes, as you'd see other cultures coming through into the school that we both worked in the United Kingdom. And from time to time, you'd see parents coming across, visiting their students, and you could see that. I remember having a student, for example, who was an absolute prodigy when it came to playing the piano. He was a little bit of a savant, and his parents had absolutely no time for music. He was to be a businessman, and that was it. And I remember on a visit to the school at one stage, I managed to persuade the young man who'd lost all confidence in himself. He was North African, and he managed to sit down, play the piano, and he was playing with this group who were made up mainly of Japanese students. Yeah. And it was just an amazing performance that he gave. His parents walked in, and I just beckoned to them and invited them in to have a look at what he was doing. His mother was keen to, but the father refused, totally refused. That was not what he wanted for his son. And, there was another part in the book where she talks about her father. This is very early on in the story, and she said he even saw academic degrees just as a passport to a good marriage. Yeah. That sometimes certain things that you embark on when you're very young can be perceived by parents as having to lead to something else, a pensionable job or a good marriage or a really good business. It's got to be a means to an end. In Ireland, we're seeing less and less of this, but it is still there.
Yeah, is it?
You know, the expectations there can be quite. So, I mean, what I found very interesting in this book was the way in which you've pitched the parents sometimes to have some quite traditional beliefs, but then very interestingly, as her life unfolds and things happen to her and tragic things happen to their daughter, they start to change too.
Yeah. It's about evolving, isn't it?
They start to open up that little bit more to her, which is and be, undergo I suppose their own awakening and process of change too. It's not carried too far, but it's still, you've left room for that, that can happen.
Yes, it's about how relationships change as you grow older and circumstances change. Somebody asked me, what is Kaleidoscopes about? But as you said, there's so many things happening there, but if I had to pinpoint one thing, I could just say it's about relationships. For me, that's the most important thing in my life. I guess the book is about relationships. It's about parents and children. It's about siblings, brother and sister. Yes. It's about lovers. It's about friends. There's friendship there. So it's, different types of relationships, husband and wife in the marriage.
Yes.
So, and how relationships change and evolve, how circumstance. That's why Kaleidoscopes, isn't it? When you keep shifting the patterns, how they form new patterns and new colors.
And psychological abuse comes in too with Mohan, who she marries. It's an arranged marriage. He's not a physically abusive man, but he is psychologically, and he's not present. He's really not present in her life when she needs him.
Again, I don't know if there's a direct influence there, but maybe it's something that in the back of your mind. I have a friend whose daughter, a traditional family, they got their daughter married, of course, arranged marriage, and he was living in a different country. And the other family was also very conservative and very traditional, and they have got this traditional marriage. And then this girl went there to live there with her husband. And only after she went there, she realized that he had another woman in his life. And he already, all he wanted was somebody who'll cook and clean and do for him. That he didn't want anything else from her because he had a girlfriend. So was that at the back of my mind when I created this marriage? I don't know.
Well, it does happen a lot. It does happen a lot, as you say, in a lot of marriages, that kind of thing. That you can't, it's because so many women, when they actually go into a marriage like that and see then that there is, three in the relationship or more, it is very difficult then not to go on a spiral downwards. And she does, again, she almost blames herself for this, doesn't she? And for not seeing this. And you deal with the psychological side of almost feeling embarrassed because you've not seen this earlier. But then, when you're placed in a situation where you marry and it's an arranged marriage, you're trusting in the parents to have done the vetting. And I loved the way you brought that in too, that the parents, you said, almost pathetically say, but we vetted him. We were very careful with our vetting, And parents don't get it right all the time.
Yeah, well, you never know what a man's private life is, how much you bet, until only the two people in the marriage knows what goes on in there. But arranged marriages are very common in India, and also marriages, again, even today, like the be-all and end-all for, particularly for a woman, also for men. And I think, as I said, when you've try to arrange a marriage, you look at many things, including education. So, and that is why, does he have a degree? Is it only a single degree? Is not educated enough? He should have a double degree. And, so all these become, as I said, passports for a marriage. And what happens after the marriage? How are they compatible? Do they live happily together? So much of it is for the society, but times are changing. At least in
do you feel that they are? Do you feel that
Yeah.
now that you've spent so many years? I mean, you've spent 18 years living in a place like Japan, and you've spent so many years living in the United Kingdom. So going back to India now, did that jump out at you?
Yeah, as I said, nobody can talk about India as India because it's such a vast country, it's so
Vast.
diverse. The subcontinent, isn't it? But the India that I belong to, kind of middle class or upper middle class, if I can call it that, yeah, things have changed a lot and people are a little more independent and they make up their own minds, they choose their own partners. So, but then there is the India of Shobha, who's here now, who's helping me, and she's my right arm. She really, really looks after us. Her world is a very different world. And of course, it would be strictly arranged marriage there. There'd be no dating. You can't know the person before you get married. And the lad who is Tony's carer, who looks after Tony, he comes from a different. So, again, North Indians have a different way of, every state might have its own way of doing things. So it's so diverse. So we can't talk about India per se. But yeah, at least among the middle class educated people, things are slightly different now. And people can choose their own partners and they do go on dating. And then there's this other India, of course, very, very westernized, very modern, very often modern can mean westernized. And of course, and what surprised Tony was once when we went for, a couple of times when we went for events, we noticed that all the young ladies, without exception, they were wearing little short dresses and all Western, the high heels. There was not a single ethnic or outfit or sari, totally Westernized, and they'll have a glass in their hand, and many of them will bespoke. So it's a different kind of. But then, if we live only amongst such people, we might think that this is what is India. But then, a lot of our India is in the villages, rural areas, and very conservative. Religion plays a huge part, and when I say religion, it could also be, ritualistic kind of belief. So that's why it's a fascinating country. I mean, one could hate or love India, but one can never get bored.
Absolutely. So when the story takes this turn now, where she leaves and she goes to London, that kind of risk taking, and it must be perceived as risk taking to a certain extent by some communities and maybe some classes, that's actually quite a big break, isn't it, to actually allow her as a young woman to make the break, go to London. Okay, she's supposed to be going to see her brother, however, it's still London. That is a huge step forward in the book. And then you have these experiences which she undergoes, which totally broaden her horizon. And you have also within that her starting to recognize all the differences in society, the differences in sexuality, the kinds of painful experiences. Of course, the first big one for her, although it is with a man that she's trying to love but clearly doesn't love her husband, is her miscarriage. It's a very big tragedy in her life.
Welcome to the show. This is Writer's Block with Miriam Kilmurry.
I have a friend of mine who's a doctor. She's a doctor in Limerick, Dr. Mary Honan, and Mary always says it is our pain and it is our differences that actually unite us. And in many respects, I think that Lakshmi, that's her first. Well, you're led to believe in the book that that's her first major crisis. But later on, as you go through, you see that she has in her childhood, in retrospection, when you take the story in a retrospective direction, she has actually experienced other pain. But that first big one as an adult of losing her child, it kind of propels the story in a different direction, doesn't it?
Yeah. And, even I had to ask myself later on what made, me make her go to London. First of all, the germ of the idea that, when I talked to my cousin, what if was about these three people, the two men and the woman. And so they had to come together. And if they're living in London, she has to go there. But it just couldn't be that. It had to be something more organic. And after, as you said, she has this absolute crisis with the marriage failing and losing a baby. And she's not very close to her parents because they don't understand there was only one person in her life she could turn to, and that was her brother. And of course, sometimes when all around you has crashed, you need to have a complete change of scene. You need to leave everything behind and go away and find a new beginning. So that probably is one of the reasons why she thinks, I need to go somewhere where I can start again, where I can even think afresh. And of course, the one person she feels that she's got a shoulder to lean on is her brother. And so that's what takes her to London. And there, of course, she meets another beautiful being, not just her brother. And
yes,
she finds that she can love.
That she can
and she
love.
hadn't really
Yes.
found love. She hadn't found that she could love. She went there, yeah.
Yeah, she takes herself.
So that was
I
another
suppose,
discovery.
absolutely, absolutely. And again, you know, in one way, I suppose she's almost sort of running away from the pain and running to London, as you say, to her brother, who has been the main man in her life in so many ways. And then too, very, very soon after that, her world comes crashing down when with concerning him. And a secret he has been carrying, and we won't give away the secret for anyone watching who would like to buy the book. We won't give away the secrets there, but it is extraordinary, you know, kind of revisiting this birth of a woman as well, who can cope with all of this, that she has no blueprint for dealing with. She has no way of dealing with all of these new things that she would have been kept very sheltered from. So when you were writing the book, Rani, did you have a sense of it falling into a particular genre?
No, I didn't think in terms of genre at all, I don't think. For me, it was just a story about three people. And as I said, I didn't even know how I don't know how it is for other writers. For me, I just showed up every morning. I just showed up at my desk and it just flowed. And sometimes, as I said, in the night, I would get ideas and I would think sometimes I wouldn't write immediately, and I'd get up in the morning and I think, what was that? And it was gone. So I started having a notebook by my night table, and I would just, write down the ideas I get. And then in the morning, as I said, just showing up at the desk morning after morning after morning. And the novel kind of wrote itself. I don't know if that sounds strange. It was not pre-planned, or I didn't think of any type of book or any genre. It just kind of wrote itself. And as I said, even I didn't know where it was going and what would happen to these three people. I just had the germ of the story in my mind, and the incidents just happened.
Fantastic. And just let me take you now to the publishing process, because I don't want to give too much away about the ending of the book itself or how you wind it up, because it's very original the way you do it. So just moving to the publishing process, had you any ideas about who you might go to? I know you had your friend, your eminent friend there, who's a writer, and I'm sure other people giving lots of input, which is wonderful, but can also be very confusing when that happens as well. You've got so many different people giving different advice, and in the end, you've got to go with your gut on what you feel you should do. So how did you take that step? You've got the book written now. Maybe you've put out teasers to people, to friends who've read it and proofread it for you, and all have a little bit of input. Did you find yourself making a lot of changes, first of all, and then how did you take the publishing process further?
Okay, as far as friends reading, it was just two people. One was Tony, and one was my dear friend Geraldine. She's Irish, and she
a name like Geraldine, she has to be Irish. With a name like Geraldine,
and yeah, you've got to meet her. You'll love her. Everybody does. She's a wonderful human being. Anyway, I used to, as I wrote chapters, I would send it to her and to Tony, and not many suggestions were made, so they kind of more or less remained as I wrote it. As far when it was finished, I was in England when I wrote this, and India, I used to only come for a visit every year, so there was no connection with India then. And I was, as you know, traveling, country after country, 6 countries in a year with the British Council. So I was never in one place. So I happened to be in England during this time when I wrote it, and then I did the editing in Dubai and in Morocco and all kinds of places. And I was in touch with a publishing company, and they wanted to publish it, but they would only pay half. And I had to put in 50% and they would put in 50%. So I thought, do I want to go that way, or do I want to, as suggested by a couple of writer friends, send a couple of chapters to different, publishing companies? But then I thought, number one, what if it's not accepted? And number two, it's going to take ages, maybe a year or two. And at my age, every year counts, I think. So I thought, do I want to wait that long? And what if they say no? So I thought, I just want to get this book, sorted out. And so I went along with this company who said they would do it for 50% of the cost. And that's what they did. And they said that they would have hard copies as well as, in different formats online. So it was, and they literally held my hand through it. It was a very smooth process. So they were good with their advice about the cover, about the photograph, or about how it should be done. So I kind of felt that they helped me through this, and they made it fairly easy for me.
So this was AuthorHouse in the end, yes? You went with AuthorHouse? They're quite well known, very well established.
Yeah. They are, and they have, if you're in England, it's very easy to connect. But they will call me even here sometimes, and they keep calling me now and saying, where's your next book? Where's your next book? And it's so funny, after writing one, I thought, no, I don't have another book in me. There's nothing more to write. And if I feel there is something, I will write. And I did.
Just take us through, Rani, take us through the publishing process. And what would your advice be to someone who's looking to publish their first book?
Okay, I think I would repeat the advice given to me by Shashi Deshpande, and that is be prepared for the long haul, be prepared for several rejections. Hopefully it doesn't happen, but as a writer, you have to be prepared and not give up on your book, not lose hope, not lose the will to continue writing, because there'll be all kinds of reasons. Publishers will say no the first time or the second time if you're not an established writer already. A lot of people, a lot of publishers, for instance, don't want anyone who has not published before. Now, where does that leave new writers? A lot of publishers probably want women writers. That happens even today. A lot of writers want some ethnic writers. They've got an idea of who sells or what sells. So there might be a lot of reasons why a book might not be okayed by a publisher. So it's not that your book is not good enough, but they might have other reasons. So the first thing is be prepared for rejections. Yes. She told me, if you're not prepared for 30 rejections, don't write. So don't write to be published. Write because you want to say something. You've got to say something.
Yes.
There's something in you that needs to come out. And so not because you want to be a published writer, you want to become famous, you want name, fame, money. Hopefully that'll follow, but don't write for those reasons.
Absolutely.
Write because you're a writer, because it's oxygen, we breathe, we write. So you write, and hopefully, everybody who writes wants the book to be read, of course. After I finished writing, I wanted people to read and tell me, what they thought of it, of course. And that's when you have to start looking at getting a book published. And there's 3 ways to go. The first way is, if you're prepared to wait and you're patient, send off. Not the whole book, never the whole book, but maybe the first couple of chapters to a few known publishers.
Yes.
And wait. Yes. Because maybe their desk is full of manuscripts, and by the time they come down to yours, it might even take a few months, even a year sometimes. So be prepared to wait for them to come back to you. So you might have to send to about 20 different publishers. It's not just 1 or 2. So you've got to send to lots and lots and lots of publishers. So that's one way to go. For that, you have to be prepared to accept rejections and be prepared to wait. So these are the two things. Now, if you're not prepared for either of those, like me, for instance, then you have the other extreme of publishing it yourself. Today, a lot of writers publish books themselves, and why not? You know,
Yes.
you can do online publishing, you can, you know, and if it's a good book and people read it, like it, hopefully, you know, you will find readers. So, but then again, it might mean spending. And if you're prepared to spend, publish it yourself. Or maybe sometimes you can even publish it online without costing much.
Yes, yeah, and I mean, I'm an indie publisher myself, and I found that the amount of work I was being asked to put in by the traditional red brick sort of publisher would be almost as much as you'd have to put in marketing your own book as an independent publisher, an indie publisher. So yeah, I mean, they are options that you can look at, but I think I've heard you mention this before, that, you know, you get to a certain stage in your life where time is more important to you. Time is of the essence, not because you're getting older, but because you know you've got other things that you've got to cram into your day and your life and give your time to. So getting published and how quickly you get published becomes a little more of an issue when you're older, maybe, than, you know, when you're a younger person.
Yes, because for me, they said a year. I thought, a year? Suddenly it seemed too much, too long to wait.
Exactly.
So the third option, which is what I chose, is the halfway house, where you have publishers, good publishers, reputable publishers, who will, chip in half. And you spend half and they spend half. But the advantage is they know what they're doing. And for me, at least, as I said, I didn't know what I was doing, except writing it. I knew nothing about it.
Good point.
And they literally had helped me through every stage. And it was so smooth that, you know, I just entirely left it to them. And of course, then they will market it for you in many different ways, but then that costs again. So if you really, really want your book to go out there, they'll do a lot of marketing, including putting your books in all the, the literary festivals and book festivals like Frankfurt and New York and all kinds of festivals. So they'll put your books there. They even will take your books to producers, Hollywood producers and other producers. But all that, of course, they have packages. So you choose the package that you want.
Yes. Yeah.
And just get it published if you want, or get it published and marketed.
It is. I think you're right. I think it's a very good option. You know, it's a halfway house option, and I think it works for a lot of people. There's only one person I've ever heard of where it unfortunately didn't work, and it wasn't that during the time that they were with the publisher that they had a problem. It was when the publisher went out of business. And really, sometimes I think looking at the contract to see what they say about that kind of situation, that's important, because then you've got no way of getting your rights back on your book. So I think that's an important conversation to have if you go with any publisher, not just a halfway house, but any publisher, and you're not indie, any publisher at all who takes on your work, just say, right, okay, if anything happened, and if it's like a huge big publisher like Barnes and Noble or whomever, Penguin Books, or they're not likely to go out of business overnight. But of course, things happen. We've just seen an epidemic come our way that have put many large organizations, you know, to the point of going out of business and going into liquidation. I think it's no harm to ask that question. What happens if you go out of business? Do I still have the copyright on my book? Can I take that to some other publisher?
Absolutely. That's something that you have got to establish right at the start. Make sure that you have the copyright so that you can go to another publisher if you want to, if you choose to, and that is possible.
Yes, and actually it's a problem. The person I'm talking about there is actually my mother. I have a, and I'm just going to put this out here because it's a book problem. My mother published with a Canadian publishing company about 6 years before she died. She published one of her books with them. They've gone out of business, and I now cannot address that issue. And so I'm seeing books. I'm seeing my mum's books being sold, And
Yeah.
nothing is coming through, no royalty is coming through, nothing. So it is actually a very, I think it's a very important thing to look at, and it's not something that I had anticipated. And I don't think my mother
Yeah.
would have anticipated this happening either.
Yeah.
You know, my mum unfortunately died of an accident in her nursing home a couple of years ago. But when it came to looking at her affairs and looking at her art, she was an artist, but she was also an author in later years. And this
Yeah.
happened with her publisher. And now I
Mm.
have no way of getting hold of the publisher. I have no way of getting hold of
Mm.
the management. And yet I am
Yeah.
seeing my mother's books up for sale.
I know, it's heartbreaking. I think that is why you have brought up such an important point, Miriam. I think we have to make sure, whichever publisher we go to, about who has the copyright. And
Yes,
in my case, I do. So I have the
very
freedom to go
good.
to another, agent
That
or
that is
another publisher
absolutely,
if I want to go
it's
to.
absolutely that's a very good thing to have thought about very early on, Rani, and I'm so glad to hear that you did. What about publishing your short stories in a book? Would you think about that being your next? You've got those already written.
I know. It's something that, I don't even think of. And when someone brings it up like this, I think, okay. I even wrote a book on Japan after coming back, and it's
Oh,
lying somewhere. I've done nothing about it. It was a thick book, I call it, because in Japan you have the hone and the tatemae, the
yes,
face that you show your family or your close friends, and the face
yes,
that you show and people think of it as two-facedness. It's not two-facedness at all. And anyway, I don't want to bore you with those details now, but I just called it the two faces of Japan. And
yes,
then I'm contrasting in every sphere of their life how they have the two faces they project. And when I came back from Japan, I was so full of this because I've had people misunderstand so much, and I wanted to correct. And I've got this fierce loyalty for Japan because they were the
yes.
most amazing hosts, most generous and kind, that I wanted to set so many things right. So I wrote it with that fierceness, and I forgot all about it. Let me mention one thing, if I may, here, Miriam. You mentioned your mother, and that brought to mind the similarity here. I'm a writer's daughter. Later years as well, my mother became a writer. And she wrote a few novels very late in, because she died when she was 62, and she thought she had a lot more years. And
Yes.
after she died, under her mattress, would you believe, we found about 10 unfinished manuscripts. She'd start something, and then she'd get another idea. She would start something, and
Oh,
we have about, and I found all these. She thought she had a lot of time, and she had this stroke when she was 62, and she died within
oh,
40 minutes. She was gone.
oh,
And it's in a language, in my language, my mother tongue, but I can't write in that language, so I can't complete it. Anyway, it's her book, and I couldn't complete it, I don't think. And this is it. English is my functional language. Kannada is my emotional language, and I only work in English. I couldn't do it in my own mother tongue, and that's almost a shameful thing to say, and I regret that. But anyway, so this is what I meant, and I find that in a small way, I'm my mother's daughter. I've had
yes.
these stories you said, they're lying there. I've got this book on Japan, and then I, rewrote a play for production in India, and I had to Indianize it, and I wrote the whole thing. And I thought, oh, I should turn this into a book, and it's lying somewhere, and I've never
Well,
done
just
anything
look at
about
the
it.
creativity there, Rani. I know you've got so much on in your life, and you do so much because I know you. But look at that. I mean, you've just told me now of about 3 possible published texts that have yet to go out there. And I mean, particularly the ones that rewriting from an Indian perspective, that would be fantastic. I just, to a large extent, I feel that our parents and our close family members can give us unexpected inspiration. Finding those texts under your mother's bed mattress must have been extraordinary. But I noticed you did dedicate Kaleidoscopes to her, didn't you? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes. And Lakshmi, of course, is my mother's name.
Is her name, yeah. So it's a wonderful thing to do. I'm sure she was so proud. I can imagine her looking down at you and saying, that's my girl. That she did that for me, you know. I still feel there's a lot of writing left in you, Rani Innes. I really do, you know. And do you think there's any possibility that you're going to maybe, please God, when this crisis has subsided to an extent, maybe take a look at doing some outdoor theatre directing again?
But really my interest is in that, because as I said, I've got this list of plays in my system. I need to get out, and I did ticked off one by one, and there are still half a dozen. And I would love to do that. But you know, Miriam, the problem with the directing plays is I have to, it's a group thing. Unlike writing, where you sit in your room alone and you can write all through the night. So I'll have to, as a director, I'll have to attend the rehearsals every day. Like an actor can only go when their scene is being rehearsed. And for me, leaving Tony and rehearsals is a big deal, because every play I did in England, as you know, for 10 years, I was the director of Canterbury Plays.
Yes, you were.
Every play I did, Tony had a part in it. And every year I directed a play. And every play, every production, Tony had a part. He either did the sound or he acted. So we used to go together for rehearsals.
Yes, I remember you used to put on plays at the Gulbenkian Theatre in Canterbury, based at University of Kent.
Yeah. We did Faustus, we did Death of a Salesman, we did Whose Life, we did Desire Under the Elms, we did Habeas Corpus. There's so many of them.
Yes.
1 second, can I get up 1 second? I want to show you something.
Sure, absolutely.
It's so faded now. This was my last production with them before I left. And this was a gift by the group. And it was a surprise. I didn't even know they had taken this picture. This is role play. And
oh, fantastic. That is wonderful. You have mentioned, Rani, I just thought I'd surprise you with this. It was a really, really beautiful photograph that I found. If I can just bring it up here. There we are.
Oh, my God. Hirokan. Oh, my boy. Yeah.
That was Hero's mother. Hero's mother and myself with you in the middle. You see, you haven't changed a bit. That was what, 2003, 4? You haven't changed one single bit.
Oh my God, no, look at me now. Old, fat, grey.
No. But I mean, they were halcyon days and wonderful. And you put on plays in that. I know that was the conference, a conference room in University of Kent at Canterbury, but the for one of the graduations. But you were putting on plays in that big professional theatre that they have, and there was a fantastic stage, wonderful stage. And you know, just it's very difficult to leave that behind, isn't it? It's so difficult to leave it behind. Now, just before we leave, I'd like to just go back to your project there with the children, schooling the children. I mean, you have done some fabulous work. You sent me these photographs of your gorgeous children there. Tell us a little more about this.
Okay, I suppose you know, there's writing, there's theatre, there's corporate training. I find it interesting, but it's more probably my bread and butter and gravy, I guess. But this is for the soul. We are, after all, teachers. We call ourselves educators, and what we do is teach. We are, as I always say, we are verbs, not nouns. Forget the title. What we do is teach. And a few years ago, there was this little girl standing outside our condominium, you know, nose running, and she was carrying a little brother on her hip and barefoot. And I said, why don't you go to school? And she said, I can't, because I've got to look after my brother. And I thought, that's not fair. So I said, will you study if I teach you here? She said, yeah. And of course, we had no classroom, nothing. So I literally, as you can see in this picture, sat on the roadside and started teaching her. And there was one child to start with, and within a week they were like this, a group of children, and in a couple of months there were more, and then more and more. And I couldn't sit on the roadside anymore, so I rented a little hole in the wall, a small room, And I started teaching them there. And now there are 55 children. That's the one, my footpath Pathshala. And there are about 55 of the children who come to us now. And they're a motley group. Some of them go to government schools, some of them are dropouts, some of them have never been to school, a couple of them go to private schools, but they all come to us after school, and we have tuition. And I've got a wonderful lady who comes and works with me, and we have 2 levels, and she teaches one level and I teach the other, and Tony comes and sits with us always. As I said, it's food for the soul. And I think although it sounds very conceited to say this, but I think we are making a bit of a difference, because the children now are starting to do well in their studies. They're starting to enjoy, studying, learning. They take pride in, in being able to read and write. So it's a drop in the ocean, really. But
and who knows, you may have a few budding actors in that group, or writers. Perhaps that'll be, I don't know if their families are able, the way some cultures don't always embrace the concept of stage. But certainly from the point of view of writing and of, learning how to speak, and you are such your use of language, I could see reading Kaleidoscopes, I could tell that you were bringing that very conscious consideration of language and how to actually string together the language within the story so that it would resonate with everybody, whether it was someone reading English who had English as their first language, or whether they were English as a second language. Your use of language was very poignant. And, Rani, I've just been delighted to have you with us today on my inaugural program of Writer's Block. It's been an absolute joy to see you again. You haven't changed one single bit. And I just wish you so much, joy and so much inspiration and motivation. And I hope that we will be able to see more work coming from you, because you are a born writer. You have a fantastic passion for language, for stories, for telling those stories. And you always did change lives. I've known you professionally for many years. And I know that there are students out there who never, ever forget you, both Indian, Japanese, from all over the world. And, you change lives. And those people are never forgotten in our lives. They're never forgotten. So thank you so much. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.
This is Writer's Block with Miriam Kilmurry. Our guest today was Rani Rao Innes, wonderful, very talented author. Kaleidoscopes is her book. It's published by AuthorHouse. You can find it on Amazon, on Barnes & Noble, on any of the main platforms. And I think you'll be very touched by this story. It resonates with everybody, regardless of their nationality, regardless of their culture, and regardless of their gender. Thank you very much for being with us, Rani. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Rani Rao Innes was in conversation with Miriam Kilmurry on Writer's Block. Please find us on YouTube. Subscribe and share. It's free.